What's up everybody? Chris Blevins here. Welcome back to the channel. Today's video, we're going to talk about 5 things that you need to know before you buy a fish finder for targeting this coastal inshore environment. A lot of the time we're fishing in water that's deeper than 100 foot. Most of the time we're fishing in water that's 50 feet or more. In our area, we're going to have deep submarine canyons. We're gonna have rocky reefs and shelves. We're gonna have kelp bed areas, and we're gonna have big sandy flats. Anywhere where you have those types of conditions or those types of environments, I think these suggestions will probably work for you. All right, so the things that you need to keep in mind before you buy a fish finder. 5 things that you need to know. Number 1, this is probably the most important thing that you need to know of any of the items. Sonar unit sends an audible signal called a ping. It transmits it and then it listens for the return ping. Okay, it counts the time in between the time that the ping was sent and that the return was received. It also knows the speed at which the ping is traveling, so the sonar will extrapolate the depth from that. The sonar beam is transmitted out in a cone shape, so imagine a cone with the very tip of the cone being right where my kayak is. So the deeper you are, the wider the area you're seeing. So the first thing you need to know for fishing this coastal inshore fishery, we're typically in pretty deep water, between 50 to 200 feet deep roughly. The sonar signal has a certain frequency associated with it, and that's typically measured in kilohertz. KHZ is the abbreviation. Important rule for all you guys to remember. The lower frequency can see better in deeper water. Let me repeat that. The lower the frequency, meaning the lower the number of kilohertz, the better that frequency can see into deep water. This is really important. When I'm out here fishing, in deeper water, probably 90% of the time I am using 83 kilohertz, okay? My fish finder is a Lowrance Elite 7 Ti, and I am on 83 kilohertz right now. 83 kilohertz will see very well into deeper water, and it will see larger game fish better. When you get into the higher frequencies, you're seeing more resolution, but not as good of depth penetration. So 200 kilohertz or your scanning frequencies like 455 or 800 are great for water that's like, say, shallower than 50 feet, or seeing through kelp, seeing through structure, or obviously if you're lake fishing, that's probably your primary frequencies that you're using. Not the case for the type of fishing that I'm doing. I want to look straight down and I want to be able to see the bottom in deep water. So you need to have a low frequency on your fish finder. And what's a low frequency? Well, a low or a mid frequency, depending on the manufacturer that you have. For Lowrance, there are 50 kilohertz is the lowest that they offer, and that has the best depth penetration. Then we have 83 kilohertz, which is what I'm typically using. I guess Lowrance considers that a middle frequency. And then the high frequency is 200 kilohertz. If the fish finder that you're buying does not have 83, 77, 50, something lower than 100 kilohertz, you're gonna have a hard time targeting these big fish in the deep water. 200 kilohertz for Lowrance also has a much narrower cone, and it needs to have that narrow cone because it can see individual small items so much better, and the resolution is so great that if it had this big wide cone, you would have tons of interference and it would wash out your signal. But just an example of how the lower frequency can penetrate better, you can see just from looking at your fish finder. So like right now, I'm on 83 kilohertz, and you can see the bottom here is this thick yellow band. I mean, look how thick it is. I'm seeing down, penetrating into the bottom, 20, 40 feet. Now look what happens when I switch to 200 kilohertz. Look, you can see here where it changed. Now look how much less penetration I have through that bottom. what is that, like maybe a quarter, maybe a fifth. Also notice how all this clutter in the top isn't there anymore, and these weird little bands on the bottom aren't there either. That's because my beam on 200 is very narrow, and the bottom is not marking very strong either. Okay, so this is a problem because I want to see wide. I want to see a wide cone that looks deep, and that's what 83 does. Let's switch back to 83. Okay, you can see the difference. All right, I'm getting a lot more noise and a lot more clutter, but I'm also getting a lot better penetration, and I'm seeing a wider space. The takeaway is make sure that if you're out here and you're trying to target the yellowtail, the white sea bass, or even if you're going offshore and targeting dorado or tuna or what have you, and you're looking in deep water, you're gonna want to have that low frequency. Now, here's the problem. Lowrance, which I use Lowrance fish finder. I really like the Lowrance products that I've owned in the past. I'm not sponsored by any company for anything, so I'll give you my honest opinion. The Lowrance is great, especially at the high level, and the mid-level Lowrance is still outstanding, some of the best in the industry. But I will say the entry-level Lowrance units are no longer offering the 83 kilohertz option. So that's a problem. If you're looking at the Lowrance Hook 2 series, if you have an HDI transducer with that, just look at the transducer that it comes with and make sure that it has 83 kilohertz or 50 kilohertz. If it doesn't, it's not the right fish finder for out here. Now, entry-level Lowrance has this new wide beam 200 kilohertz, I think is what they're putting on their hook reveal. And a lot of people who are just getting into kayak fishing are getting those hook reveal series, which I highly advise that you do not get that. All you have is 200 kilohertz, you don't have 83 kilohertz, and you're gonna have problems when you're looking for those big fish in the deeper water. If you're mostly fishing in lakes or shallow bodies of water or bays, or you really like the kelp beds, probably the hook reveal series will be fine for you. But if you want to fish like how I'm fishing, where I'm dropping irons, I'm dropping dropper loops on big marks on the bottom. I mean, you guys see the kind of marks that I get. I mean, it's plain as day when I have a school of yellowtail come through. You're gonna need 83 kilohertz or you're gonna need 50 kilohertz. If you're in Garmin, Garmin also has a 77 kilohertz option. All of those are great. Also in the chirp frequencies, some of the companies may call it medium or mid chirp or low chirp. Okay, those are the frequencies that you want. Make sure you know what kind of fish finder you need for your target waters. If you really want to come out here and fish La Jolla and fish, you know, or any coastal inshore fishery where you're fishing deep water, fishing live bait, looking for big fish, you need that low frequency. Okay, that's number one. So number two, second most important thing that you need to know before you buy a fish finder for your kayak is how are you going to mount your transducer? Transducer mounts come in all different shapes and sizes. The Hobie system is really awesome. They have an integrated scupper transducer hull. So my transducer is in the hull in a scupper underneath me with a protective plate over the top. That cavity, the scupper that the transducer in, fills with water, so the transducer is completely submerged in water, and it only has to shoot through this, you know, thin plastic cover plate that's underneath it. Gets a really good signal, not much interference, it looks really good. Okay, not all kayaks have a scupper mount transducer. Not all kayaks have a scupper that you can mount a transducer in. So what you'll see a lot of people do is they will goop it inside the hull and have the transducer, you know, dry inside the hull but kind of adhered to the bottom, so it's shooting through the hull. This will work in a pinch. I don't recommend this type of setup. You are losing, so think about the strength of your sonar is basically how far can that ping, how far can that sound transmit. And if the first thing that your signal has to do is go through that super thick roto-molded plastic, you're gonna lose like 50% of the strength. Granted, will it work? Yes. Will you be able to monitor the bottom and see the bottom? Yes. But you're not gonna be seeing all those fish, especially not the ones out on the periphery. You're not gonna have as much return coming back because you're losing it through the hull. That gets even worse if you goop it in and you have air bubbles in the adhesive, or you don't install it just right. So if you are going to do a through hull fitted transducer mount, maybe it's best to have somebody, the pros like at OEX, install for you, because they're really good and they can get it in there super clean and flat. However, I would recommend over the through hole option, I would get the boom arm, which goes over the side. Okay, so I would just put a boom arm here, go over the side, and then have my transducer mounted probably just beneath the surface there. And that's going to give you the best return, even better than a scupper mounted transducer mount. So again, if your kayak does not have a transducer scupper, you're going to need to either get it mounted inside the hull, or you're going to have a boom arm over the side. And out of those two options, I would recommend the boom arm to get a better transmission. Okay, item number 3 that you need to know before you buy a fish finder for kayak fishing. You need to calculate the draw of your fish finder and figure out the size of the battery that you're going to use. Okay, you're going to have a 12-volt power supply, whether that's a sealed lead acid battery or a lithium ion battery, or I'm sure there's other types of batteries out there now. You're going to need to make sure that you have enough amp hours to run your fish finder sufficiently to get you through a trip, right? So I think my fish finder draws about 0.9 amp hours, 0.9 amps per hour, and I have a 15 amp hour battery. So theoretically, you know, maybe I could get 15 hours out of it. Realistically, it's about 12 hours that I get off that one battery. Okay, I use sealed lead acid. I'm not wasting a bunch of money on lithium batteries yet. Maybe one day. But you're gonna need to make sure that you have the right battery to run your fish finder. Okay, if you have a fancy fish finder that has side scan and has down scan and 3D imaging and real-time, you know, map generation, you're going to be drawing a lot of amps, and you got to make sure you have enough juice to run you all day. Okay, have that in mind ahead of time, and scale your battery appropriately for the fish finder unit that you're going to get. If you're going to the high end, you're going to need a lot of battery to push that. If you're going on the lower end, you're going entry level, typically that will have a very low draw, and you can get away with a pretty small battery. Another factor that'll play into your battery usage is whether or not you select a GPS on your Sonar unit. Lots of people, I think, typically always have GPS, but it will significantly increase the battery consumption, the energy consumption. So if you're in the entry level end of things, I would actually recommend don't get a GPS. Just use your phone or something for a GPS, or even if you have like an old Garmin, you know, GPS for hiking or something, use that and save the juice on your fish finder. You know, you don't need to, for an entry-level fish finder, you don't need a big chart plotter, because you're not going to have a big screen where you can display all this information all at once. Typically all you're going to have is just a blank screen with a little arrow on it, which really doesn't tell you a whole lot. Save your money on that GPS early on and get just a nice fish finder that has, you know, color screen and low to middle frequency, and maybe GPS is less of a priority for the entry level, especially if battery consumption and energy consumption is at a premium. So just make sure that you look at your manufacturer's specs and determine what the amperage draw per hour for your fish finder is, and make sure that your battery is scaled appropriately. All right, so number 4 is pretty important, and I see a lot of people neglect this, is the economies of scale. Okay, marine electronics are not cheap. Probably the best you could hope for in an entry-level unit with no GPS would be like a Garmin Striker with 77 kilohertz, under 200 bucks maybe. Okay, and the upper end of that goes super high. You know, my Lowrance Elite 7 Ti2, I think you can pick that up for around $400 or $500 these days. So that's middle of the road. And then that goes all the way up to the HDS series, which is, you know, you're looking at $1,500 or so for fish finder. So we'll call that the high end. Know what your target range needs to be. I know probably a lot of advice out there is buy the best fish finder that you can afford, but I don't think that's the best advice. I think you need to look at your entire setup of gear and think, you know, how much have you spent across the board? You need to think of the amount of money that you have to spend on kayak fishing and then try to disperse those resources across the different aspects of what you need evenly. Okay, you're gonna, if you don't have poles, if you don't have gaff, if you don't have waders, if you don't have all these other critical items like a VHF radio, don't go spending a bunch of money on your fish finder at the expense of getting all these other important items. Okay, you want to make sure that you have your bases covered before you spend a bunch on a nice electronics. Now the converse of that, and I see this probably more common, is you see people who are just decked out and they have nice reels, nice gear, a nice Hobie, expensive Hobie kayak, you know, but they'll have that cheap hook reveal fish finder. It's like, man, you just spent 500 bucks on the Tranks, but you only want to spend 200 bucks on your fish finder. I think your fish finder should cost about as much as all of your poles put together, because it's that much more important than any one single pole. Now that's just my opinion for the type of fishing that I do, but you see guys that have, you know, Trinidads or a Tranks or, you know, Lexas and nice gear, and then they got that, you know, cheap fish finder. Okay, should have maybe spent some of that money from those poles on that nice fish finder unit. So spread your funds, spread your resources out evenly amongst all of the different aspects of the gear that you need, and don't just go all in on that one sexy item that you really want to get. Try to find a fish finder that fits your scale, the scale of your fishing economy. So the fifth and final thing, don't let your fish finder be an excuse to keep you off the water. More importantly, your lack of a fish finder. You should get excited about stepping up your game and bringing the electronics on board. It's a complete game changer. It opens up a whole new level of fishing, especially when it comes to finding bait. But if you don't have a fish finder yet, or maybe you're saving up your money and you don't know which one to get, don't think that you can't come out here and have success without that fish finder, without that investment. I caught many yellowtail with no fish finder before I ever got on board with fish finder, and while I had either no fish finder or a very cheap entry-level one, you could still catch lots of fish. The most important thing is getting out here, getting comfortable on the water, getting used to the launch, meeting some people out here, getting used to the whole setup, you know, getting your gear dialed in. Don't think that you have to have your fish finder all dialed in and ready to go to get out here. Just get on the water, and the more time you spend out here, the better idea you're gonna have of what type of fishing you like to do, what style suits your fishing the best, and that'll have a big impact on the fish finder that you want to purchase. So don't let your lack of money or the lack of electronics or gear prevent you from getting on the water. I have a video where I show a very simple setup, just 2 poles, no fish finder, no bait tank, where you can come out here and catch a trophy fish with very minimal gear, under $1,000 in gear total. So don't think that because you don't have $1,000 fish finder that you're not in this game. Get out here, get on the water, gain passion for the sport, and then go and make your investment. Because you might find out that you really like kayak fishing out here, and you want to spend, you know, your entire paycheck on a new fish finder, and that's great. Or you may decide that maybe it's not for you, and maybe you prefer the inshore stuff, or you prefer fishing kelp beds or lakes. In that case, your fish finder purchase will be influenced by that as well. So don't let the fact that you don't have a nice fish finder or any fish finder keep you from getting on the water. Get out here and make it happen, and you'll progress to that level. All right, so that's the 5 things that you need to know before you buy your next kayak fish finder. I feel like it's probably one of the most misunderstood parts of fishing, and it's also probably my biggest strength, or one of my biggest strengths in fishing. So I really think I can help you guys out when it comes to picking the right fish finder and also setting it up for optimal performance in these types of conditions and in this type of fishery. Again, I don't have any sponsorships or affiliations. I'm just telling you my honest opinion and what I think, so take it for what it's worth. If you liked this video, leave me a comment and let me know what type of fish finder you have, and is it working for you? And if not, what could be better about your fish finder? Let me know in the comments. Maybe I could help some of you guys out. Click that link below to sub to the channel. Thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you at the launch.